Ah, that one. Of course I had to do it. Having written the story of my character Elizabeth Puritan in my recent book The Mysterious Death and Life of a Millennial, I had to do it. Not only because the story behind this is of course tragic and mysterious, but it's also fascinating in its very own way. Have you ever been accused of things that you've never done? Whether it's at work or at home, it could have been silly questions such as who ate the last slice of cake, or is there money missing in the team? Or your colleague said about you that you've been saying that you like your boss a bit too much, or you want to have another person fired, or whatever. And people look at you. Because you said you were feeling a bit peckish yesterday, or because you were with your colleague who made a mistake while counting the cash and said that you stole the money, or you've been helping another colleague but your employee said that you took a longer break. So everything leads them to believe that whilst it wasn't you, it was actually you. And it's not nice at all. I'm sure all of you have such stories to think about someone who said something that you never done. And feel free to share it in the comment section below. But well, if you ate the last slice of cake or the last sweet or whatever, and if you're accused of that, well, most likely it's not a big deal. Worst case scenario, it's gonna make your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife or partner or whatever a bit upset, but it's not gonna lead to a big drama. But if you're at work and money is missing, but your supervisor is holding you accountable for this mistake, then it can bring up some more consequences if you do not justify yourself. But in both cases, false accusation most of the time comes from assumption, and assumption generally often leads to accusation. Someone said, well, I assume you did it. And like my flying instructor would have said, do never assume. Assume and you're gonna make an ass out of you and me. But in today's episode we will explore that the simple fact of assuming things can lead to dramatic consequences, and if one day you accused someone just because you assumed things that it was this person, then it will probably make you think twice. Now, fellow travelers of the unknown, please grab yourself a coffee and make yourself comfortable. And let me tell you today the story of the mysterious life and death of the Salem Witch Trials. Welcome to Salem, Massachusetts. So, if today's Salem is a quite peaceful and charming city of the state of Massachusetts, or at least so it seems on the Google Street View as I've never been there, perhaps one day, who knows, back in the days, in 1670, it was another story. At least it was a peaceful place, but a war between the two important families, the Porter and the Putnam, was ongoing. Now, for understanding the story that is to come, let's start with setting the context on how it takes place. In 1670, we were not yet in the United States of America. In fact, the idea of uniting the states was not even in anyone's mind at the time. It all started in Europe with someone named Martin Luther 400 years before. Back in the days, the Catholic Church had a strong influence over lives in the Middle Ages, and of course it was widely accepted that no one would ever believe that something different could even exist. In fact, anyone who could think differently that there was only one God was made a pariah, being called a heretic. So that included scientists, as we've seen in the Dark Matter episode with Kepler and Newton, and unfortunately many great minds, called heretics afterwards, as well as Jewish people, paid the hefty price for the society's global intolerance. But back in 1410, a famous king of England named Henry VIII turned 40, and as age was kicking, despite the fact that he was still a handsome man, he was married to Catherine of Aragon, and, you know, the midlife crisis kicked in. And there was also this pretty girl roaming in the Hampton Court castle named Anne Boleyn. He had a very bad crush for her, like the very bad one. And after all, who cares, he's the king, he can do whatever he wants. So, as he was the type to do what he said and to say what he wanted, Catherine grew old, and the fact that he had only one daughter with her was turning the tipping point of his reign quite bitter. He would have loved to have a baby boy, but things were very different. And there was this Anne who couldn't leave his mind. In fact, he was in love with her, and I think someone should have told her that remaining too close to this king was perhaps not the greatest idea that she may have had, considering the outcome of the potential future marriage. So Henry was like, nah, I want Anne so bad. And he did what any man would certainly do today, started thinking about a divorce. But remember, we were in a Christian society back in the day, so divorcing was not really well observed, and it was in fact a controversial move, even more for a king. Yet, for breaking up with the old one, he wrote to the Pope, as the Pope was the highest authority, even beyond kings back in the days, to request his permission to divorce, citing, well, funny motives. The Pope was like, nah bro, you're married, you made your choice, it is what it is. Henry didn't like that, and he wasn't the type of guy to whom you'd actually refuse something. Like, he didn't like that at all. So he replied, I tell you what, mate, if you don't grant me my divorce with Catherine, then you know what I will do? I won't recognize the authority of the Catholic Church in my kingdom. You're out, mate. No! The Pope replied that, do whatever's the best for you, mate. Okay, those letters weren't precisely written in those terms, but the idea was there. So in order to divorce, Henry, rather than obeying to the orders of the Pope, created, in a surprising move, his very own religion. Surprise! Breaking up with the Catholic Church as well as his wife Catherine. And if that story reminds you of a recent event occurring in 2016 in the United Kingdom, well, it's a pure coincidence. Anyway, now that Henry was very pleased as he did his very own Brexit and was now free to marry the lovely Anne Boleyn, what is called a schism would start to operate in England. And the people of England were summoned to convert to this new religion, as the Catholic Church was no longer welcome in the kingdom. In fact, throughout Europe, a new movement of Christianity was born, and this was called Lutheranism, from Martin Luther. This movement was questioning a lot of things that we're not gonna be talking about today because it would take forever, but in a nutshell, it was a sort of a revision of the Bible. And Henry VIII kind of joined this movement that we know nowadays under the name of Protestantism, and he created a branch within this movement that is called the Anglicanism. In fact, this movement still exists today, and our noble King Charles III is the leader of the Anglican Church, alongside being the King of the United Kingdom. Anyway, the thing is, the transition between Catholicism and Protestantism didn't go smoothly in England. In fact, during the reign of Henry VIII, it was more of a period of transition, but the decline of the Tudor era, whose Henry VIII was one of the kings, changed somehow the face of the world. As Henry died, his young son Edward, whom he didn't have with Anne Boleyn but the one after her, ascended to the throne, but not for long. During his reign, Edward kept the changes his father initiated but died very young, and Mary, the first daughter he had with Catherine of Aragon, succeeded. And the idea of a new religion didn't really please Mary, whose mother paid the hefty price in the shade of this rehearsal of Brexit. And she was a profound Catholic. She wanted to avenge her mother and brought a strong halt to the changes that her father initiated by the means of the classic persecutions, obviously, burning churches and everything. This in favor of the Catholic, and she tried to destroy everything, but unfortunately unsuccessfully. I mean, unfortunately, why am I saying that? Unsuccessfully, because she died. She died, and now the final Queen Tudor ascended the throne, daughter of Henry and Anne Boleyn, and she was come to be known as Queen Elizabeth I. Yeah, the hell of a karma. And of course, she was a Protestant. Yes, you guys know what that means. All the way back through persecutions again. But now, changes were made for good, and she would settle the religious question in England once and for all. But during the fantastic ages of persecution, Protestants started to flee, because the promised land that was England for them was somehow jeopardized by all those changes. And the problem was, most of the kingdoms in Europe, France being the most important, were all mostly strongholds for Catholicism, and they were rejected everywhere. So they settled in Holland, which back in the days was in fact a laic republic, and some of them, who are called the Puritans, purchased a boat to move back to England and to settle in what everybody talks about at the moment, the New World. It's a newfound land away from there, right after the Atlantic Ocean, and no one really knows anything about it, except that it's inhabited by many tribes of people that we used to call back in the days Indians, but I would respectfully call Native American today. This land is what we know today as America. And I'm sure you guys have heard about this boat, at least once. It's the Mayflower. And basically today a lot of Americans are descendants of the Mayflower passengers. They traveled during an extended and certainly nightmarish journey from Plymouth, England to the Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where they will settle down and build a town they will call Plymouth too, perhaps as a tribute from where they left, or a lack of inspiration. It's actually one of them, no one has ever said. But anyway, when the settlers, today known as the Pilgrim Fathers, arrived in the Cape Cod, they came with absolutely nothing apart from a boat and not a lot of food left, and life was a real challenge for them. But they didn't claim the new land as a new independent country. No, they claimed the land in the name of the King of England, and thus the Massachusetts became one of the new 13 colonies that England would establish in America under direct rule of the United Kingdom. The thing was, these colonies had special rules and were not administered like the United Kingdom would, and therefore had their own system. But London would have its word to say over decisions taken there, which would lead to certain consequences such as the future American War of Independence 100 years later. But more importantly, the settlers, at the moment they left the Mayflower, signed all a document promising to help each other and remain brothers. And this document will be seen in a way by many historians as the very first constitution of the country that they'll ultimately build through their descendants, which we will call soon the United States of America. Now, that's for the context. But let's talk a bit about the technical aspects. What is a witch? You're gonna say it's someone who has special powers and who's able to cast spells and all that kind of stuff. If you're an enthusiast of Harry Potter, you're gonna have certainly plenty of examples, but that's not what I'm talking about today. From a historical point of view, what is a witch? Well, it's a serious accusation. It's actually a very bad one, along with heresy. In comparison, accusing someone of witchcraft would be like, today, if you were accusing someone of being a pedophile or a terrorist. Back in the days, this was really serious and not taken lightly. But hopefully, just like today we have the NCA here in the UK or the FBI in the US to track down those special offenders, or the MI6 and CIA for hunting down terrorists, in 1600 we had the Inquisition to make sure everybody was believing in God in the correct way to believe in God. And we had a lovely German inquisitor named Heinrich Kramer, who wrote a crazy little book named The Malleus Maleficarum. And I'll certainly talk about this in a further episode because, yeah, what a story again. Witchcraft had long been forbidden by the Catholic Church. Of course, amongst many other things such as homosexuality, it were types of behavior considered as demonic and would deny you the entrance to eternal life. But this may have been condemned. There were no papal bull or law that would formally condemn this behavior or even manual to give a legal threshold of how to sentence a witch. Because there have been, according to the church, many cases of witchcraft, but no text or law to sentence them. So Pope Innocent VIII worked on this in 1470, and as a result, Heinrich Kramer wrote the book. So the thing was, the Catholic Church throughout Europe was seeking people who were not believing in God the official way. The reason behind this was that if you do not go to the church and follow what the priests are telling, then you can disagree with the church and teaching and thus not recognizing the Pope or the King of your country as legitimate and the authority. So that's why so much energy was deployed to make sure everyone would be kindly obedient. And as such, the society was globally intolerant, and everyone who could be different was meant to be eliminated or made a pariah. For this, the Inquisition was made as the police of the Catholic Church to make sure that everyone would believe in God. And the thing the Inquisition enjoyed the most was to go from villages to villages, hunting down poor religious behavior. And seeing the Inquisition for villagers was usually a bad news. That's something that you could eventually avoid if you subscribe to this channel and turn all the notifications. Or you could also be following me on my networks. Link is in description. I mean, just saying that, you know. Anyway, as I said, the Inquisition was traveling from villages to villages, mostly to hear gossips. And let's imagine that you have a neighbor with whom you have a problem over, let's say that your horse is going to eat in their field, for example, then, oh, you know, this guy is not a nice guy. I heard he practices witchcraft from time to time. But of course, since the Inquisition made sure that all accusations would remain private, so they were coming, knocking at your door and taking you away. And this was new with the Malleus Maleficarum. It was recommended to use torture to obtain a confession from a person accused of witchcraft. Yes, because we can never be too sure. And this was recommended to use the worst means in order to make sure that the witch would talk. So, without entering into everything that the Malleus Maleficarum was saying, because for some part it's absolutely revolting and disgusting and mostly misogynistic, it gave a legal threshold and indeed paved the way for what would become the witch trials in the future. And there were many witch trials throughout the world, thousands, where mostly women died, and some of them remained in history. And it's this way that we arrive in Salem, Massachusetts, in 1692. So, Salem, back in the days, was in fact divided in two cities. We had Salem Town on one part, and Salem Village, which is nowadays the city of Danvers. So if you paid attention to the date and you know a bit about history, you may know that back in the days in the English world, things were a bit funny in the outcome of troubles in mainland England due to the Glorious Revolution and the trouble within the political landscape. What made the Massachusetts a colony was the Royal Charter of 1629, but this area was settled by many groups, all of them deeply religious at some extent, but the community of Salem was, let's say, a bit extremist in their own view. For example, in their community, the human, in their global term, is a preacher since they were born. Everyone was mostly rejecting the ideas of the Catholic Church and, of course, even more of the Anglican Church, and had their own way, but still, the idea of witches remained, and this was still a gross accusation that could sentence you to death. But how a community of settlers worked was simple. They were obeying to a central government, so the governor of Massachusetts, but everyone was doing the law and local enforcement the way they wanted, and there was no central government. And this obviously included justice, unless the governor would put his nose into this. But in every villages, the reverend, or the minister as I will refer to him in this episode, was the authority in the city and everyone saw him as the chief of the community. But Salem was far at this time to be a peaceful place to be, and the settlers, even though living within the same community, were most of all divided. It was Love Island in a nutshell, but in a more fanatic religious style. The subjects of divisions were mostly about property line, grazing rights, and church privileges. In fact, everybody described the community of Salem as a drama land. But since every community were electing a minister of their own, in 1672, Salem elected James Bailey, who ran Salem between 1673 to 1679. George Burroughs succeeding him, officing for a few years between 1680 to 1683, departing after a congregation composed of 5 people, which would be seen as the advisors to the Reverend, or the Minister of the Cabinet, failed to pay him his full salary. Burroughs would nevertheless be arrested during the trials and have a night in prison. For a complaint purchased, the night in jail is offered. Anyway, after Burroughs, someone named Deodat Lawson succeeded him between 1684 to 1688, leaving after the church refused to ordain him, creating even more dramas. Samuel Parris succeeded him in 1689, but this led to a drama between Salem Town and Salem Village because both disagreed as to how they should pay Parris, and therefore a deal was agreed to give him £66 annually, which today would be laughable considering the inflation, but it was pretty good money back in the days, and paying for the provisions. So now you've got this. A community was deeply rooted into drama, because ministers were not remaining in office very long. But Parris wasn't seen as a great leader. In fact, even though he was the one who remained the longest time as Minister of Salem, the state of drama culminated, and Parris made sure to amplify those divisions rather than solving them, as he was in fact making sure to please the important people or those who could help him. On top of that, Cotton Mather, a minister of the Boston North Church, became a prolific publisher of pamphlets, all of them talking about witchcraft, and most of them ended up in the hands of Salem settlers. This was certainly one of the factors that would ultimately lead to the big one. And the big one, or the culmination of all those dramas, started on this fine day of January 20th, 1692. For the record, it was a Tuesday when Abigail Williams, aged 11, and Elizabeth Parris, aged 9, both being respectively the niece and the daughter of Minister Parris, started acting weird. So by acting weird, we're talking about screaming uncontrollably, throwing things around the room, contorted strangely, crawled under furnitures. So they were brought to William Griggs, the doctor of the village, and the diagnosis, as the man of science he was, seemed pretty obvious. Yes, this is witchcraft. I mean, it was obvious, wasn't it? Very quickly, another girl, Anne Putnam Jr., will start acting the same way. And Elizabeth Hubbard, aged 17, therefore an age to testify, will feel the new strange symptom of hysteria, witchcraft. So of course, this was the starting point of the big drama that would later be known as the Salem Witch Trials. But this did not mark the beginning of the legal proceedings. No. Around the 25th of February 1692, Mary Sibley, who was a neighbor of the Parris family, asked John Indian to ask his wife Tituba to make a witch cake made of rye meal and the 2 girls' urine in order to find out who were the witches. Yummy. The idea was to have this cake eaten by a dog so they could find out who bewitched the girls, but this was called out by the Reverend himself and asked for Tituba to apologize for having carried out such practice. But she was forgiven. Yet, meanwhile, Elizabeth Parris was under the spotlight because now we needed names, and 2 names would quickly come out: Sarah Osborne and Sarah Good. Have you got the popcorns? Because now we're gonna get started. Of course, following the accusation, arrest warrants were immediately issued against Tituba, Osborne, and Good precisely on the 29th of February 1692, following the complaint of Thomas Putnam, Edward Putnam, and Thomas Preston. Surprisingly not from Reverend Parris, who still had his daughter inflicted by a case of witchcraft, but anyway, why not after all? The warrant was issued by Magistrate Jonathan Corwin and Jonah Thorne. Immediately, Tituba, Osborne and Good were arrested, and as a result, interrogation immediately started between the 1st to the 7th of March. Indeed, the 2 women denied being involved in that story, but Tituba said something different. No, she admitted the witchcraft. Yeah, it was her. But Good and Osborne were both their co-conspirators. But on the 11th of March, whilst everyone was talking about this mysterious outbreak of witches in Salem, Anne Putnam Jr. comes up with another new story. Not only she had another affliction of witchcraft, but Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott and Mary Warren also had their share, even though they had no witnesses. So, of course, these assumptions were taken very seriously, even though they had no evidence to support those, but this was like putting another coin in the machine. Because this time, on the 12th, Anne Putnam accuses Martha Corey, and on the 19th, Abigail William accuses this time Rebecca Nurse of witchcraft. So on the 21st, Magistrate Hathorne questions Martha Corey about this accusation, and the next day, they also interrogate Rebecca Nurse. But in the meantime, they also arrested the daughter of Sarah Good, Dorothy Good, a 4-year-old kid, also accused of witchcraft because, yes, sometimes they can start very early, we are never too suspicious. And quickly, on the 28th, whilst all those lovely people are all in jails and questioned, another name comes up, Elizabeth Proctor. So now, at this point you might say, okay, this drama is created from people who are profoundly religious and are using false evidence and looking for scapegoats, but is it possible that the girls truly had something in the end? Well, it turns out that historians and scientists have been wondering the same question, and one theory emerged: ergotism. Back in the days, agriculture was important, even more in those colonies in America, and ergotism is the disease that comes from the accidental consumption of ergot, which is produced by a fungus developed on the rye or other grains. Once consumed, it can have either a gangrenous form, so developing gangrene, or it can be convulsive. And it kind of matches. Ergotism can develop in spasms, diarrhea, itching, or other forms of psychosis amongst other symptoms. There is just one big problem with this theory. Ergot is particularly hard to miss. It grows on the cereal and it's particularly visible. And even once smashed, ergot would make some sort of red powder, alerting anyone that consuming this would probably not be a great idea. But it's possible that it could have been missed. But this didn't change anything to the situation. As the drama continued and deepened, slowly reaching a tragic point, new people started to be accused. Sarah Cloyce, who defended her sister Rebecca Nurse, was now accused of witchcraft, and John Proctor, husband of Elizabeth Proctor, became the first man to be accused and was jailed on the 11th of April. But this was far from being over. In the midst of the storm, Mary Warren started to say that she lied, and she accused everyone who were accusing people of witchcraft to be liars too. This change of attitude didn't slow down Anne Putnam Jr., who instead continued accusing, this time Jill Corey, whom she alleges that a man who died at his place still haunts him and is being possessed. In addition to this, Abigail Hobbs, Bridget Bishop, Jill Corey, and now Mary Warren herself are all examined by the magistrates. Mary Warren is now accused to be part of the plot, being out in a somewhat uncomfortable position within this drama as she was previously an accuser and thus reversed a statement in early April stating that they were all liars. Now she miraculously says that she was just confused and comes back as one of the accusers. On top of that, Deliverance Hobbs, Abigail's daughter, confessed practicing witchcraft. But Mary Eastie, who defended her sister Rebecca Nurse, is examined by the magistrate, who also examined a bunch of new people, including Nehemiah Abbott, Sarah Wilde, William and Deliverance Hobbs, Edward and Sarah Bishop, Mary Black and Mary English. But that's not over. The former minister, George Burroughs, you remember the guy who went to prison because he asked his salary when he was a minister of Salem? Well, turns out that he was also accused of being a witch. Like I said, we can never be too sure with witches. Anyway, in May, on the 4th, Burroughs is arrested in Maine and sent back to Salem to be examined by the magistrate before being moved to a Boston jail. Meanwhile, on the 10th, they examine both George and Margaret Jacobs. Meanwhile, Sarah Osborne sadly dies in prison on the same day. Now, the attention over Salem became somewhat important, and something quite important happened. On the 14th of May 1692, the Reverend Increase Mather and Sir William Phibbs are appointed governor of the colony, and they brought in Boston the new charter establishing the province of Massachusetts Bay. That indeed meant a complete change in legal proceedings that nothing seemed to be able to stop now that they were still examining suspects and throwing them in jail. Soon enough, things would escalate to the next level. Later, on the 18th of May, Mary Eastie, previously arrested because she was defending her sister, was released from prison, but following protests from her accusers, she was rearrested. Roger Toothaker is also arrested, now accused of witchcraft too. But it was raining accusations, bringing the total number of people in custody now to 62. So now, May 1692 would mark the end of the first round of examinations because Governor Phibbs appointed a commission to oversee the outbreak of witches in the city of Salem, constituting a court that is called the Court of Oyer and Terminer. The commission is composed of John O'Thorne, Nathaniel Salton Stall, Bartholomew Gidney, Peter Sargent, Samuel Sewall, Wade Steele Winthorpe, and Lieutenant William Stroughton. But before proceeding to the next act of the show, Hawthorne, Corbin, and Gidney examined on the 31st Martha Carrier, John Alden, Wilmer Reed, Elizabeth Howe, and Philip English. Despite this, Alden and English would manage to escape from prison and never return. But now the time of examinations was over. Now we started the round 2, trials. And of course, it meant business. And the spectacle started with Bridget Bishop. Now, one of the reasons why Bishop got arrested was because her lifestyle was deemed to be too provocative towards the Puritan community. For example, she was wearing black and strange costumes, and as a result, it was not okay. In the day of her trial, she was asked to reverse her coat, and everybody said to have seen cuts and thorns in different ways. She was indicted on the 2nd of June, tried and convicted of witchcraft. She was hanged at Gallows Hill on the 10th of June, and she opened the party. On the 16th, Roger Toothaker dies in prison. Sarah Good is tried between the 28th and the 29th of June and is found guilty. On the 29th, Susanna Martin and Rebecca Nurse are also tried and found guilty. On the 30th, Elizabeth Howe is tried and found guilty. 2nd of July, Sarah Wilde is tried and found guilty. And now all of them, Good, Martin, Nurse, Howe, and Wilde, will be executed by hanging on the 19th of July at Gallows Hill in Salem. But that's not over. August was also a busy month and the bloodbath continued. The nominees were, on the 3rd, Martha Carrier, on the 4th, George Jacobs Sr. and John Willard, and on the 5th, George Burroughs, Elizabeth Proctor, and John Proctor. All indicted, found guilty, and sentenced for execution. Execution scheduled for all of them on August the 19th. Elizabeth Proctor would, however, be spared of being executed because she was pregnant. September, round 3. Dorcas Hoare, Alice Parker, Anne Pudeator, not to be confused with Elizabeth Pudeator, that's another story that I recommend you guys to read, link is in description. Martha Corey, Mary Bradbury, Mary Eastie, Samuel Wardwell, Wilmot Reed, Mary Parker, and Samuel Scott are all found guilty after trial on the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 14th, and 16th of December. I know that's a lot of dates. All of them would be sentenced to death on the 17th after Abigail Faulkner Sr. got also tried and found guilty. Rebecca Ernst, Mary Lacey Sr., Anne Foster, Abigail Hobbs also plead guilty to the charges of witchcraft and were awaiting sentencing. On September 19th, however, Gill Corey is pressed to death as he refused to be tried before God and the country, meaning in front of a court. He eventually died 3 days after the beginning of his execution. September 22nd, Corey, Eastie, Parker, Pudeator, Scott, Reed, Wardwell, and Parker are all hanged. Mary Bradbury, however, managed to escape and is, as a result, not hanged. But now, since things went ballistic in Salem and, of course, they started to attract attention, things would very swiftly change. Unfortunately, too late for some people. Because on the 3rd of October, Reverend Increase Mathers started denouncing the use of the spectral evidence in the trials. So, you guys remember when I spoke about the Malleus Maleficarum? Well, right. The spectral evidence was something very common in the cases of witch trials. It's perfect to make evidence a proof that is not even one. The idea behind this is pretty simple. Let's imagine that you go to a court and you say that someone is tormenting you through spectral images. So, you know that, I don't know, your colleague, your manager, your neighbor, or someone you don't like is tormenting you. This will be taken as evidence that this person is a witch. How? Well, because it is considered that this person has given the devils permission to impersonate them and as a result to torment you. So now you might say, what if the person lies? But no guys, that's absolutely not an option. No, don't even think about it. Once the court has taken note of this, they will say, yes, this person is a witch and is theoretically impossible to refute. So this is why Governor Phibbs saw that now the court established at Salem started to become a ridiculous and cruel joke. And many women and men already paid the hefty price of their life for accusations that were more than questionable, especially as to how trials were effectively carried out. So on October 29th, he simply overturned the court, forbidding them to carry out any further proceedings after having written to King William and Queen Mary of England. With the court effectively dissolved in October 29th, this gave some hope to those already in custody that now the death machine was effectively stopped and perhaps their life would be spared. But meanwhile, all the drama profoundly affected Salem, and the village was now no longer functioning as it should be, as the bloodbath was on everyone's mind, and of course many people were still in custody due to the story. The cattle weren't fed, the many services important to the village were simply no longer done or carried out, because people in custody were just not replaced. It's under this condition that the trial resumed, but this time under the supervision of the governor's people. And this time, reason was more coming back to the court. As the legal proceeding resumed in January 1693 now, 23 of the last people were found not guilty. 3 were still found guilty and 13 were cleared by proclamation. 1 died in custody and 1 ended up not even being indicted. According to Governor Phibbs, 53 people have been cleared by either not being indicted by the grand juries or just being found not guilty at trial. And this masquerade of what was to become famous as the Salem Witch Trials ended there in May 1673 with a horrible result. As of today, many theories emerged as to what happened in Salem, amidst conspiracy theory or even the Huntington theory as well as ergotism. All that we know is that some of the victims have been pardoned on various occasions. Some memorials have been erected around Salem, but the question remains unanswered. Was it really witchcraft? Or was it just an incredible manipulation story that went horribly wrong? All that we know is that in the outcome of this, on August 1706, Ann Putnam Jr., one of the accusers of the trial, declared that I desire to be humbled before God for that sad and humbling providence that befell my father's family in the year about 92, that I, then being in my childhood, should, by such a providence of God, be made an instrument of the accusing of several people for grievous crimes, whereby their lives was taken away from them whom now I have grounds and good reason to believe that they were innocent persons, and that it was a great delusion of Satan that deceived me in that sad time, whereby I justly fear I have been instrumental with other, through ignorantly and unwittingly, to bring upon myself and this land the guilt of innocent blood. Though what was said or done by me against any person, I can truly and uprightly say, before God and man, I did not, out of any anger, malice, or ill will to any person, for I had no such thing against one of them. But what I did was ignorantly being deluded by Satan. As we close this haunting episode, the echoes of the Salem Witch Trials reverberate through the annals of American history, a grim chapter marked by fear, superstition, and a failure of justice. It's a tale that not only unsettles, but forces us to confront the darker aspects of human nature and society's propensity for hysteria. In the grand scheme of things, Salem serves us as a cautionary tale that challenges us to question our collective values and the mechanism of our own justice system. As you mull over this disturbing period, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comment section below. How does the tale of Salem reverberate in today's conversations about fear, prejudice, and due process? Until our next rendezvous with the enigmatic and the inexplicable, keep your mind sharp and your sense of justice keener. See you next week, fellow travelers of the unknown.